All right, let's start this out with a bang. You've got here the last moments of a Hezbollah rocket launcher being taken off the battlefield by Israeli forces. Now, if you thought that might have looked a little bit like a civilian vehicle, that's kind of the goal. It's crazy, I know, right? Why on earth would Hezbollah want their rocket launchers to look like civilian trucks from overhead? I guess that's just a mystery for the ages. But they've actually put out a couple videos like this recently showcasing these mobile MLRS systems in action. And you can see, I mean, from the side, it looks like a civilian vehicle, right? Let alone from overhead. These mobile MLRS platforms have actually been pretty challenging for Israel to identify and destroy, which is why we're still seeing them taken out at this point in the war. The fixed locations, much easier because they can't, move. But these mobile sites send off a few rockets. They can travel to a firing point, send off a few rockets, and before Israel is able to get target or assets overhead, they can be back undercover. It's a pretty serious challenge. Now, today I want to show a handful of footage from the ongoing war between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. There is talk, as I'm recording this right now, on November 25th, 2024, that a possible ceasefire is underway. We'll see. It's definitely closer than it ever has been. But regardless of whether or not that ceasefire comes into effect at all, and then, of course, whether or not it's permanent, I do still think it's worth, from time to time, taking a look at some of the footage from the ground to get an idea of how this war is being fought. So in any case, in any war, I think there's some value in looking at some of this. Now, the majority of what we're going to look at today is Israeli footage. We did have some Hezbollah footage to start. We've got more coming up. But look, they're just not putting out a lot at all. And, between you and me, I think the reason might be because a lot of them are dying very quickly. And they're just more focused on dodging Israeli raids and airstrikes than pumping out videos for Telegram. Personal assessment. But we do have a lot more from Israel right now than we do from Hezbollah, and more on that here in a second. And something that I wanted to highlight through some of this Israeli footage, and we are going to spend a lot of time diving into the tunnels here briefly, but the combined arms operation nature of this fight. It's very, very different. I mean, look at this right here. You're seeing countryside, a rural environment, night operations, right? Moving through the mountains and the hills of southern Lebanon. This is very different than what we saw really throughout the entirety of the Gaza Strip, which is, of course, a very dense, built-up urban environment. What that has translated to is we've got a lot of dismounted patrols moving through the mountainside like you're seeing here with some very specialized Israeli units. And then we are also seeing a lot of Israeli armored vehicles, tanks, being able to maneuver through certain areas. It's just a very different vibe, if you will, the fight up north. We've also seen a lot of the civilians evacuate from southern Lebanon, and they actually had places to go. Like they could just move north kind of at free will, especially as Israel started putting out warnings that they were going to start advancing into some of these areas. So a lot of the locations that Israeli forces are moving up against, they're able to bring in heavier firepower because they can look at these locations for days or weeks at a time before they conduct that operation to identify patterns of life and recognize, are there civilians in the area? Yes or no? Where are those civilians located, and where are the possible Hezbollah locations and firing points? So it's something they can do in Lebanon that they really weren't able to do in Gaza. We did see, here's a little bit more of an urban environment. I don't want to paint the picture like it's entirely a fight in the countryside, because that's not the case. And anywhere you go, you bump up against a few houses, a few buildings. It does turn back into that close quarters combat, having to clear a building in an urban type environment. But it's very different in the sense that we're not seeing anywhere near the volume of civilians. Now, I mentioned we're not getting a lot of Hezbollah footage at this point, but we are getting some, and this is part of it. The problem is I wouldn't really classify this as like combat footage at all. I mean, this is pretty clearly staged propaganda videos, right? Most of what we're getting right now, and I'll show some of this more here in a moment, is really how Hezbollah has been responding to Israel really from the beginning of this iteration of the fighting back on October 8th of last year, but certainly since Israel kicked off the ground invasion into Lebanon last month, and that is mostly drones, rockets, and missiles being launched from Lebanon into Israel. Hezbollah releases that footage just about every single day. So we do get that, but there's just only so much you can take away from, the same looking drone launch. Half of the thing is blurred out anyways. You got to assume that it's recent because they just put it out, but who knows? But we have gotten a few of these videos showing, like in this case, an ATGM strike against, construction equipment in Israel, which is interesting. This is one of the more notable clips in the last couple weeks here, showing pretty clear footage, from what we can tell, of an anti-tank guided missile being fired from Hezbollah in southern Lebanon against a backhoe. They say it was military backhoe, if that makes it any different. I don't know. Kind of looks just like normal construction equipment to me here, but this one was circulating all across Hezbollah channels, showing, again, what appears to be a successful Hezbollah strike. We're not getting a lot of that when it comes to engagements against Israeli military forces. So I don't know, maybe this hints at the fact that Hezbollah has kind of taken the wins where they can, right? A lot of the footage recently has been showing drones and rockets impacting in civilian areas, and now we have ATGMs impacting construction equipment in southern Lebanon, northern Israel. I think that is kind of an indicator of where this fight is right now. Now, by contrast, there is still footage coming out almost every day from Hamas in Gaza. So the whole idea that Hezbollah is not going to put anything out because they're actually engaging Israeli forces, like Hamas has never stopped on that front. So it's a clear difference. Now, diving into some more of the Israeli footage up here, the thing that's really caught my attention in the last month or so here has been the tunnels that Israel has uncovered. And we've seen a couple different variations of these so far, and we're going to be able to run through a couple here. We've got some like this that are very rudimentary. I mean, this looks like some dude with a pickaxe got to work for a while, right? I mean, it still would take quite a bit. But we've also got some more that we'll get to here in a minute that are like professionally dug tunnels. Have to imagine that there was some commercial grade equipment to actually dig into the rocks and the mountainside like this right here, right? And this is how we saw a lot of the tunnels. What I'm going to try to do is contrast some of this to some of the tunnels we saw in the opening days of the war in Lebanon, because this one is much better built than some of the others that we've seen. So again, the tunnels in the opening days were like this, right? Very fancy, very nice. We saw electricity. We saw running water, generators, refrigerators, all sorts of stuff in those opening days. It's changed a lot recently, and I want to know if anybody else has noticed this, but a lot of the tunnels now are looking dirtier. I mean, you can see clearly here, tunnels dirty underground. I got it. I'll clarify. What I mean is, clearly somebody was living here, and they were living there not that awful long ago, or at least staying there. But in the first few days and weeks of the Israeli incursion into Lebanon, it looked like the Hezbollah fighters had been operating there like that day and then said, I'm out of here, and just taken off and took off up north. More and more what we're seeing is this. It's like a dump, right? There's just stuff everywhere. And I thought this one was interesting because it's a little bit different, and you can see kind of the tunnel entrance in a residential area here. They point to the motorcycle as being evidence that this was going to be used by like an assault team in Israel. I don't know. Also could have just been the guy's motorcycle. A lot of people use motorcycles. But look at this tunnel entrance, right? So we're talking about how these guys can easily infiltrate, easily move into these tunnels. It looks like a civilian the entire time. Then all of a sudden they show up in a house. You kind of lose sight of them. What's that random civilian doing? And they pop down below ground into one of these tunnel networks. And here is just some of the equipment pulled out of this one tunnel. And I think what we should probably do is, when it's all said and done, maybe it's when a ceasefire occurs, we'll lay together all the different footage showing how much Israel has taken from Hezbollah just in the course of the last 30 days. I mean, there's a technical with a rocket launcher, kind of like that. That's unique. But anyways, day after day, we are seeing countless videos and pictures showing the massive stockpiles that Israel is pulling out of these tunnel networks and some houses above ground. We're talking about a lot of Iranian, Syrian, Chinese, and Russian equipment, a lot of it brand new. They'll show some of it here in a minute. Tons of ammunition, anti-tank guided missiles, rockets. Here we've got AK-47s. It is a shocking amount. And I think it's easy to lose sight of just how much Israel has taken off of Hezbollah's hands in the last month or so. It could be interesting to kind of compile all of the footage side by side. It would go for 45 minutes. At least at this point. It's a shocking quantity. Now, the vast majority of this stuff is going to be blown on site, destroyed, so it can't be utilized by anyone after Israel moves through. Some of it will be taken back into Israel for training purposes. Some of the more advanced stuff they might want to study and kind of get a better idea how that weaponry is used if they don't already have that. But again, by and large, it's going to be destroyed on site. I have heard some people ask if any of this is going to be shipped over to Ukraine. I haven't heard of that happening at all. There's no indications that it has happened or that it's going to, but it's a good idea. They could certainly use a lot of this gear. Now, there was one thing that came out this past week I wanted to highlight. This is an recently Iranian-made cannon of sorts, 106 millimeter. Totally random, right? Look at that thing. And it's relatively new. too. I mean, the thing's all rusted to hell, but there was a plate on this thing saying it was manufactured in 2017. So it's only like 7 years old, but I guess it's sat out in the elements and been used to fire into Israel for quite a while now. Now, there were a couple of videos here I wanted to show of these MLRS systems that were uncovered by Israeli forces recently. We started the video looking at some of the mobile systems, and I want to shift over to some of the more fixed location firing points. A lot of these have been destroyed by Israel in recent weeks. But we've got a couple here, and it's not just the Israeli perspective of actually uncovering these locations and the ammunition stuff they're finding, but we can actually wrap up the video by showing the Hezbollah perspective of launching these rockets from a very similar location into Israel. So these MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems, are, I mean, if you look at them, there's only so much aiming you can do with this, right? And there's been a lot of accounts already. These are military grade rockets, but just look at how they've been stored, and depending on the operator's experience, these don't always go where they want them to go. And again, with this type of munition, you're talking about that general direction, aiming more for like a town in general than a specific building is the right way to put it. And we saw some just this past week impact inside UNIFIL bases in Lebanon. And quite a few of these don't even make it into Israeli airspace before kind of malfunctioning and impacting in Lebanon. But I do want to show you the Hezbollah perspective of these same rocket systems. This is, a lot of videos recently. Again, this is what they're focusing on. Rather than showing troops on the ground, is showing a lot of these rocket, drone, and missile launches into Israeli territory. And you can see these guys moving the rockets from their storage location, setting them up inside of the rocket pods, and then they're going to sling a handful of these into Israel. And these are pretty similar in a lot of ways. You have to wonder if these are some of the same ones, actually, that Israel has uncovered in some of their more recent videos. But you can see how they're ready to go, pretty well camouflaged from all sides, all things considered. And then, they're not going to be striking a specific building or a certain gate on an Israeli military compound, but it is enough to get Israel's attention, and I don't want to downplay it. There have been plenty of Israelis wounded in recent days from this continuation of Hezbollah attacks. But that's all I got for now. Thought it was worth diving into some of this footage released by both the IDF and Hezbollah over the last couple weeks, kind of giving an idea of how this war is playing out on the ground. If you're looking for something a little more in-depth and a little bit longer, be sure to check out our podcast called Unclassified. We just rolled out the first episode last week, myself and a friend of mine, Ben Wheeler, talking about all things national security. This first episode, we focused on the war in Ukraine, the war that Israel is fighting, really on 7 fronts. China, Taiwan relations, and more. I'll link it in the description below. If interested, it's on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, all the places you can listen to podcasts. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.